Audible Studios presents Fairy Magic, The Changeling Chronicles, Book 2. Written by Emma L. Adams. Performed by Lucy Christian. Chapter 1. "It's not that bad," said Isabel, my closest friend, as we prepared to face the music. Or rather, fairies. "There are 50 piskies trapped in a garden shed," I said. "It's not bad. It's a shitstorm of epic proportions." The overgrown back garden we stood in practically advertised itself as a haven to fairies, a warren of brambles and rotting trees. The people who lived here had let their pest problem spiral so far out of control, it was lucky they hadn't woken up with all their hair missing. "Pity the Mage Lord can't appear and displace them all to Antarctica." Isabel might be second in line to the local witch coven, but even she hadn't been able to devise a spell for extracting piskies from a shed. Very funny. Vance Colton, Mage Lord and royal pain in the arse, wasn't here, which irritated me more than the oncoming horde of rabid piskies. He'd left on an important mission. And to say I was pissed off he'd left without a warning would be an understatement, let alone that he'd been gone a week without so much as a call, especially as he'd asked me out on a date before he'd left. "Hey," said Isabel, waving a hand in front of my face. "Now is not a good time to be daydreaming." I shook off all thoughts of the Mage Lord. We had a horde of piskies to deal with. Pisky eviction was the lowest of menial jobs, but covering this month's rent payment mattered more than dignity did. Since I no longer worked for Larson, who ran the local mercenaries, I was forced to rely on independent clients. For 16 glorious hours, I'd owned more money than I'd ever owned in my life. And considering I'd nearly died to get it, the spoils were more than welcome. Then the local council had swooped in and taken every last penny to pay for damages on behalf of the Necromancy Guild. And then I'd called Vance, only to be told he'd disappeared off the face of the earth. This after I'd walked away from Larson, my old boss, thinking a steady job awaited me at the Mage Guild. Someone up there really didn't like me. So here we were, in the dingiest part of witch territory. Our own house sat at the other end, where it merged with the shifters' lands. This place, on the other hand, lay on the half-fairy's doorstep, which explained the piskies. "Think of the money," I chanted in my head like a mantra, as I helped Isabel set up a protective spell in front of the shed doors to keep them from swarming out all at once. Piskies were the weakest of fairies' creatures, but it didn't mean they couldn't claw us to pieces when enraged. I tossed my ponytail over my shoulder and readied my weapons. I always carried at least 3 daggers, but Irene, my sword, did all the heavy lifting. Iron was fatal to fairies, and I hoped waving it around would be sufficiently intimidating to send the piskies into our trap. The chilly early autumn night wind whipped through my thin jacket, recently cleaned of the most recent spillage of monster guts. I'd hoped to replace my threadbare and blood-stained clothes using the bonus money, but at this rate I wouldn't even make a rent payment this month, unless I managed to do the impossible and get those piskies out of the shed. Said Isabel. "I don't think letting them all out at once is a good idea. They'll just swarm somewhere else." "Yeah. You know your mass sleeping potion? You said it doesn't work on fairies." "No, it makes them drunk." As I'd found out the hard way, when Erwin, the pisky who lived in our flat, had fallen asleep in a bucket of the potion when Isabel left some out on the table. We needed to capture the beasts while they were conscious. Not ideal. Yells and other indiscernible noises rang out from down the road, where the area bordered on Half-Blood District. Probably a fairy house party. I hated the sounds of Faerie. The music alone made me want to curl up into a ball. But luckily, the high hedges around their territory muted the noise, along with a million spells designed to keep outsiders away. Even the half-bloods would call pest control in this situation. Taking a steadying breath, I readied my hands on the lock. Best get this over with. I unlocked the shed door, whipping out my sword as I did so, then jumped behind the protective barrier. Immediately, the racket coming from Half-Blood District disappeared under the screams of 50 enraged piskies. They swarmed as one, bouncing off the shield outside the door. Even though the layer of shielding kept them contained, the edges began to smoke. "Crap," I said. "Guess they must have some magic in them after all." Small fry-like piskies had less magic than brains, and that was saying a lot. But with so many in a single place, they'd whipped up a storm. The inside of the shed became a torrent I didn't want to look into. "Right," said Isabel, a resigned expression on her face. "It's time for Plan B." She took out a trapping circle and set it up on the ground. Normally, we'd put sylvan leaves or another kind of bait inside it, but we didn't need to lure the piskies out. They already wanted out, and our only option was to extract them one at a time and get them into the trap. I shot her a worried glance. Most of the time, I worked alone on jobs like this. Isabel might be tough, but fairies were a species most humans couldn't stand up to. The most dangerous jobs fell to me, from raiding trolls' nests to killing man-eating hydras. Though I didn't work for Larson anymore, I was well known amongst the other mercenaries as the Faerie killer. I grimaced, reaching over the shield and grabbing for the nearest body. The pisky was surprisingly heavy for an 8-inch tall twig-like creature, and I nearly dropped it when sharp teeth bit into my finger. Wincing, I hauled it over the trap's edge, which snapped into place immediately. 1 down, 49 to go. "We should strike efficient off our ad," said Isabel. "And reliable," I muttered, examining the wound on my finger. Shallow puncture marks. Not poisonous, at least. Right. I dived back in, getting another bite on my arm for my trouble. After 10 piskies were safely contained, I stopped, staring at my arms. Blue light spread across them, like when I used fairy magic. Usually the power activated at the last possible moment. Was it because there were so many piskies? "Ivy? What is it?" I shook my head. "Nothing. I think they have magic, though. We need to be careful carrying so many of them at once." The shed exploded. 1 second, the piskies battered against the shield. The next, a blast of dazzling blue light shot up from the shed, and the walls and door burst into a million wood fragments. I threw myself to the ground behind the ward line. The piskies flew upwards in a shrieking horde, as though the line didn't exist. "Shit!" I yelled, searching for Isabel. She'd been forced to hide behind the trap, which had caught at least a dozen more piskies. Unfortunately, the rest of the swarm tasted freedom and liked it. The darkening sky disappeared beneath fluttering wings and pointed faces. Piskies didn't fly in formation. They crashed into one another, fighting, clawing, screaming. Sharp teeth dug into my arm, and I yelped, swatting the pisky away. I jumped to my feet, waving my sword, trying to drive them towards the trap. Isabel got there first, and the trap expanded to cover half the garden. Too late. A good third of the piskies had already flown in the opposite direction. I stared after them, unable to believe my eyes. How had the weakest denizens of Faerie blown up a shed and a witch's ward to boot? Isabel kicked one of the piskies into the trap with surprising anger. Generally, she was as laid back as I was impulsive, a balm to my quick temper. But nothing pissed her off as much as one of her spells not working. "Guess we have our answer about why Erwin keeps breaking through our wards." I wiped my bloody hand on my jeans. Damn, Who'd have thought they packed so big a magical punch? If you say so, said Isabel. What did that look like to you? All I saw was a big explosion. Had to be magic, I said. A lot of it. She frowned. I thought you needed the sight to see fairy magic. You do. This wasn't right. Is that what it always looks like? Blue light? I kept forgetting, what with the myriad other problems knocking at my door, that Isabel had far from exhausted her list of questions on the fairies. Since I'd told her my experiences as a captive of Lord Avakis of the Grey Veil, she'd barely been able to restrain her curiosity. I was, after all, the only human any of us knew who was able to see and use fairy magic. Not to mention the only human who'd ever escaped the fairy realm alive. Trust didn't come easily to me, and I suspected it'd be a long time before I grew used to the idea of even my best friend knowing my darkest secrets. Blue or green light, depending on whether the magic belongs to winter or summer. You've already seen what both can do. She closed her mouth, forehead puckered in a frown. I was half unconscious for most of it, she said, referring to the time she'd spent in a necromancer's summoning circle while half-fairy ghosts ran amok outside. True. I stared at the sky. The Piskies were long gone, though the yowls and screams of their brothers and sisters rang out from the trap. Damn, maybe it wasn't fairy magic. Hang on. I climbed over the splintered remains of the shed door, shattered so thoroughly it had turned into sawdust. Isabel hesitated, then followed. Might be a trap in here. I expected to find a trace, at the very least. Isabel was the expert in magical explosive devices, several of which I carried in my pockets. But when she joined me in scanning the ground, her expression told me she was just as clueless as I was about what caused the explosion. Nothing, she said. No spells at all. Are you sure Piskies can't combine their magic? Pretty sure I'd know by now, I said. They swarm, but they can't so much as conjure up a spark. And the light, it didn't look like summer magic. Piskies came from the Seelie realm of Faerie, the one where people pretended to be nice, then stole your money. So what was it? I shrugged. Angry yells behind us reminded me 20-odd enraged Piskies waited to be escorted back to the cleanup guild at Lawson's place. I sighed and stood up. Well, that could have gone better. Should have brought backup, I imagined Vance Colton saying, to my intense annoyance. His displacing ability would be damned useful to get rid of those Piskies. A cynical part of me whispered that I should have known it was too good to be true. We might have worked on a case together, but I'd been riding the high of being alive when I'd quit my job and put my future in his hands. Too bad my impaired judgment had been stronger than his desire to stick around. Despite myself, I clicked through to his number on my phone. This was the kind of incident the Mage Lords needed to know about. Whatever history existed between Vance Colton and I was irrelevant. He was head of all the magical practitioners in the entire town. Hell, in this area of the country. I couldn't even get a wayward Pisky to leave my flat, let alone convince the necromancers not to take away all my money. Still, his rejection stung. My bank account more than my pride. Vance's sort, descended from rich English aristocrats, were a little out of touch with the cutthroat world the rest of us lived in. I'd hoped to change that when I started working with him. Apparently not. My hand hovered over the call button, and my phone buzzed so suddenly I nearly dropped it. The number calling me wasn't the Mage Lords, but my ex-boss, Lawson. My hand clenched around the phone, and I damn near threw it aside in disgust. The sleazy bastard. No matter how desperate I got, I'd never work for him again. I glared at the phone. Apparently not getting the message, it kept buzzing. Why aren't you answering? Asked Isabel. Lawson. I spat out his name like a curse. Why would he be calling? Because he wants to exploit or blame me for something. Maybe he found out I'm the one doing this job and wants a cut of the profits. I pocketed my phone again. I'd forgotten Erwin the Pisky had chewed holes in my pocket. So the phone fell through and clattered on the ground. Ivy, said Lawson's voice. Shit. I picked up the phone, checked for damage, and was about to hang it up when he said, Wait, listen for a minute. Or what? I glared at the screen, like he could see me through it. I told you never to speak to me again. I have a client who wishes to hire you. I laughed aloud. Fuck that. Fuck that, and fuck you, Lawson. He took my abuse with unusual calmness. This is urgent, he said. There's been a murder in Half-Blood District. The mage lords are absent, and every half-faerie in town is calling for blood. Well, shit. Chapter 2. Murder in Half-Blood District. For all their bloodthirsty nature, half-faeries rarely turned on one another and preferred to settle their disputes without involving humans. They were all, without exception, devoted to their faerie heritage and had no time for the mortals who shared their blood. A riot wasn't a nice thing to walk into. A half-faerie riot, though. Even if I hadn't been walking in the direction of the hedges at the border with half-blood territory, the noise would surely have drawn my attention anyway. The shouts, which I'd assumed came from a house party, grew loud enough to spear my eardrums, while bursts of magic lit up the night like a fireworks display. Which, presumably, was what everyone else thought it was. Most people were too frightened of the half-bloods to complain to the police about public disturbances. Faeries. Bringing communities together for 20 years and counting. I reached the gap in the hedge where the gate to the Half-Blood District lay, closed off. Isabel hurried to catch up, clutching a stitch in her side. You can't be thinking of walking in there. Someone has to sort them out, I said. They'll blow up the town at this rate. On cue, a blast of ice struck against a wall of quivering thorns just inside the entrance. Bits of plant exploded behind the gate, and the air turned cold, then scorching hot. The spells would overstep the boundaries soon. I had my trusty iron blade and a half-dozen daggers, but I didn't have the means to stop a full-blown riot. I looked at Isabel. Any spells you can think of? Maybe put them all to sleep? Probably won't affect them, if it doesn't even work on piskies. They're half-human, I reminded her. It's that or let them kill one another. Right. She rummaged in her shoulder bag. There's no way. I only have a handful of spells on me. No sleeping ones, just explosives. And I don't think they need any more ammunition. Fair point. I cursed to myself. Damn Lawson. What the hell did he expect me to do? Waltz in and sing them a lullaby? My former boss had almost got me killed through negligence once already. Worse, he was the acting authority if none of the mages were answering calls, so nobody else would be able to help. Isabel took her phone out. I'll contact the coven, she said. Bring backup spells. This isn't ideal, but I can't think of anyone aside from the mages who'd help. The necromancers won't want to know, I said. And throwing shifters into a riot is like throwing a dog into the middle of a street cat fight. Tell me about it, said Isabel. Damn it. This might have started with a murder, but more half-faeries would doubtlessly be killed in the fighting. The blood alone would attract every dark denizen from Faerie hiding in the town's shadows. We'd be chasing death fairies out of the streets for a month. Admittedly, my own rule against spilling faerie blood in this realm had gone out the window lately. think, Ivy. Might my magic be able to calm them? Most likely, no. I didn't dare cross the boundary. Not outnumbered like this. I'd only aggravate them further, or give them a new target. A blast of cold air slammed into us from behind. Isabel made a startled noise, while I spun around, sword ready, searching out the new threat. Had the half-fairies brought the fight outside? The front of the hedge disappeared, swept away in another blast of wind. I bit back a yelp, arms wrapping around myself, bracing my feet to avoid being knocked over. A figure moved past us, driving us aside with the force of the power he carried. Clouds drove in, sweeping over the nearby houses. My teeth chattered, legs locking in place as leaves stirred up by the wind whipped against me. The Mage Lord, tall and imposing, strode past me as if I wasn't there. "Enough," Lord Vance Colton said, his voice projected by what I assumed was a spell. "If you don't stop, you'll cause irreversible damage to your home and to this realm." Shocked faces stared through gaps in the hedge, most mid-fight. "What the hell?" yelled a half-fairy. "It's not your business." "I am Lord Colton of the West Midlands District Mage Council, and I have authority to have any of you detained for causing a danger to the human and supernatural communities. If you cause any more damage, you'll find yourself at the mercy of every mage in this district." Whoa. Guess he was prepared to take on Faerie after all. With the power crackling over his head and slicing up the air, I almost believed he'd be able to face down a she-lord. Almost. "Is that clear?" he asked of the ringing silence. I'd been so startled by his sudden appearance, I only now realized the rioting had stopped altogether. Whoa. "Is that clear?" he repeated, moving close to the bars of the gate. The air stirred into a cutting breeze, tearing leaves from the hedge and forcing me to back away, feet braced on the pavement. "Yes," said the nearest half-fairy, tripping over his own feet in an effort to get away. I watched, open-mouthed, as the riot dissolved. Vance had stopped the fight like a schoolteacher disciplining an unruly hall of kids. Which left us. "Vance," I said, "is there—" "Leave them," he said. "Let them sort out their own battles." He turned heel and vanished. Literally. In addition to being able to grab objects out of thin air, the Mage Lord had an interesting relationship with the laws of physics, like the ability to effectively teleport. What the hell? Last time I'd spoken to him, he'd promised me a date. Now he'd taken away my job. Again. "What was that?" said Isabel. I shrugged. The Mage Lord had actually rendered me speechless. Fury surged, and I kicked at the half-fairy's gate. "No clue." "I thought he was—" "My friend? My freaking boss?" I swore and kicked the gate with my other foot. Now my bruised toes matched. Brilliant. Isabel stared after the Mage Lord. "I've seen some scary-ass magic, but damn, I'd rather face down a shifter." "He's part shifter, technically," I said. "That explains the temper." "I know, he's positively cuddly." Actually, Vance was the only person with shifter blood I'd met who demonstrated any kind of restraint. Sometimes, anyway. Okay, so he'd skewered people with invisible swords, and came close to accidentally killing me twice. Maybe it was for the best we'd never got a date. "Come on," said Isabel. "Let's go and fetch those piskies." "I'd rather walk in there." I jerked my thumb at the gate. "Wonder who died." Probably more than one of them by now, the way they were fighting. Isabel grimaced. What kind of magic did he use? She didn't need to say his name. I turned my back on the half-faeries' place and reluctantly led the way to the house where we'd left those piskies. Mage Lord Badassery? No clue. He's a displacer, so I suppose he shifted all the air around us to make a dramatic breeze. And vanished into thin air, added Isabel. Is he a stage magician in his spare time? I snorted. He defines over-dramatic, but no. As for where he's been the last week, no clue. Might have stuck around to help us with this. She indicated the garden up ahead, and the ruins of the shed. How were we meant to explain to the people who'd hired us that the piskies had blown up half their garden? We'd probably get charged for damages on top of not being paid. I groaned. Time to explain the rules of magic to skeptical humans again. I doubted Vance would consider the trouble the fight would draw from the other fairies living in this realm. No, some poor freelancer would have to deal with the mess. Unfortunately, only one person in town specialized in dealing with fairy cases. Yay, me. Paperwork, said Isabel in a sing-song voice, depositing a stack inside my bedroom door. I rubbed my eyes and groaned. Unlike me, Isabel was wide awake for someone who frequently pulled all-nighters, dressed in an outfit entirely too bright a shade of green for this hour in the morning. Thought you'd let me sleep in, I mumbled, hiding my head under the pillow. You need to hand these into cleanup by 10. I would, but I have to be with the coven in an hour. I groaned again and rolled out of bed. We'd stayed up half the night filling out paperwork to prove the piskies were responsible for the damage to the garden, so we'd actually get paid. No money had materialized yet. I didn't blame the garden's owners for being pissed, but it eluded me how a bunch of hyped-up piskies could possibly have blown up a shed. I wasn't mentally present at all. Bite marks covered my hands and arms, because I'd forgotten to use a healing spell after all the excitement. Worse, us coming back smelling of pisky had sent our own resident pisky, Erwin, into a frenzy. He'd zoomed around breaking things, until we'd been forced to trap him in a spell circle. I shoved on my second least tattered pair of jeans, and a t-shirt that used to be black before the color washed out, and walked barefoot into the kitchen to scrounge some food. The smell of Isabel's baking cookies somewhat restored my mood. She'd left a tray out on the side, luckily away from the chalk circles covering every other work surface in the flat. The doorbell rang. Oh, for God's sake! I turned heel and went to answer it. Please not Larson. Please not Vance. For once, I wouldn't have minded it being a freaking door-to-door salesman, if just to avoid being dragged into any more crap. Like I'd be that lucky. The Mage Lord stood on the doorstep, coat sweeping around him. More due to the autumn wind than his mage special effects. Oh, I said. It's you. Don't look so happy to see me, said Vance Colton. Are you baking? He walked right past me, and before I could gather my wits, walked over to Isabel. Those look nice. Oh, take one, she said with a cheery smile. I shot her a glare, which she ignored. Damn it. Compliment Isabel's cooking and you'd pretty much got an open invite for life. Vance picked up one of the cookies and bit into it. I turned my glare onto him. Did you just invite yourself into my house? Technically, your friend invited me in. Then I'm uninviting you. He put on a mock-wounded expression. Such a cutting tongue. Isabel, can you give me the recipe for these? Yeah, sure. Her face flushed like a traffic light. Great. Not only had he invited himself into my flat, He'd charmed the wits out of my best friend. "Vance," I said warningly, "tell me why you're here, or I'll have to ask you to leave." "Really?" I glared at him. "No bullshit. What do you want?" "Wouldn't you believe I wanted to make a friendly social call?" Isabel wisely ducked out of sight. I heard her bedroom door close and sighed inwardly. Great. Exactly what I least needed. "What the actual hell, Vance?" I hissed. "It's common courtesy to let people know you're planning to vanish off the face of the earth, especially when you've just offered them a job." His smile vanished. "I apologize. I was called to an urgent meeting and forbidden to take my phone with me." "Oh. Right. Any reason you didn't text me when you came back? Or talk to me yesterday when you weren't pulling your creepy superpowered mage lord trick on the half-fairies?" "I rather think it'd have spoiled the impression." I crossed my arms. "You think I'd have wrecked your street cred?" "That's beside the point. You disappeared. Right after we nearly died. As he knew well, the dickhead. He'd also kissed me. Several times." "You're suggesting I ought to have told the entire town the Council of Mages were gone?" "You have my number," I said. "And I had the impression you—" What? Liked me? Wanted me? One eyebrow rose. "Yes." "Intended to finish our conversation," I said, already regretting speaking. "Never mind. I should have figured you'd disappear as soon as you had reason to." "The leader of the East Midlands Mages was murdered," said Vance, stunning me into silence. "What?" "Murdered," he repeated, with a flash of anger in his eyes. "By a half-fairy." I gaped at him, unable to hide my shock. Half-fairies might be anti-human and pretty much anti-supernatural too, but even they showed basic respect to the mages. The mage lords most of all. "Who?" "That's what we're trying to determine," he said. "It appears to be an isolated act of a madman, but our supernatural alliances are fragile, and this might mean dividing further." "The half-fairies live behind an impenetrable hedge," I said. "Pretty sure that's as divided as you can get. And one of them was murdered yesterday, actually, by another half-blood." He raised an eyebrow again. "Really?" "Yes." I didn't say Larson had told me. Like absolute hell would I admit to the Mage Lord that I'd nearly taken work from Larson, even if he'd driven me to it. Obviously, I haven't been able to poke around, because when we got there, the whole place was about to go up in flames. "Why were you near Half-Blood District in the first place?" I scowled. He always managed to ask the questions I least wanted to hear. "On a job. I'd have escaped your attention. I'm short on cash." He frowned. "You just got paid for our work bringing those children back from Faerie." He doesn't know? "The necromancers took it." My hands curled into fists. The bastards. Sure, I'd killed one of them, but he'd been possessed by a half-fairy ghost and trying to kill me at the time. The necromancers didn't see it that way. Vance's icy cold expression could have frozen embers. "I see." "Don't," I said warningly. "They had reason to. We messed up their territory, and You saw me stab one of them when those ghosts took control of their bodies." He'd critically injured another necromancer himself, but even Lord Evander wouldn't dare press charges against the Mage Lord. Instead, he'd waited until I was alone, then pounced. I had no evidence against the testimony of 200 necromancers and the spirits they summoned. "Lord Evander and I will have words," he said, putting emphasis on words so it sounded more like, "I'll hang him up by the neck," Nobody implied threats quite like the Mage Lord. "Don't we have a more urgent problem?" I said. "The necromancers won't do jack shit to help us with the half-fairies." "Neither will anyone else," he said. "The other supernatural groups hate the half-bloods, and with good reason. The fairies exposed us to the world, in addition to the damage they wreaked." You didn't get a bad deal, I couldn't help thinking. The Mage Lords were now the most powerful people in the world. Before the invasion, they'd hidden along with witches, shifters, and other supernaturals. Half-fairies, as far as I was aware, hadn't been heard of until the invasion. While most fairies were fighting a war, others decided to seduce humans. I'd put the average age of a half-fairy at 19 or 20. What we'd witnessed last night was nothing more than a group of teenagers collectively throwing a tantrum, with deadly magic. "So what then?" I asked. "Someone clearly needs to talk to them, find out who died, or if anyone knows about this other death." His expression darkened at the reference. Had he known this other mage well? Maybe they'd been friends. Maybe he had an excuse for running off after all. Nobody had handed the Mage Lord a guide to not being a dick in social situations. I'd think twice before trusting him again, but I could count my allies on one hand. I'd rather be on Vance's side than against him. "Yes," said Vance. "Someone needs to talk to them. I rather hoped it'd be you." I froze. Forced a laugh. "What?" "Half-blood territory is deadly to most humans," said Vance. "As for supernaturals, the half-fairies would attack most of us on sight." "And you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure they wouldn't attack you." "No. But I doubt they'd confide their deepest secrets either." "What the hell do you think I am, the fairy whisperer?" He arched an eyebrow. I went on. "You can't be serious. Even if they didn't try to kill me the last time I went in, they're out for blood and begging for a scapegoat. We're not even allowed to take iron weapons into their territory, and unlike some people, I can't bend space and grab a sword whenever I feel like it. And I'd rather avoid them finding out I had fairy magic. Okay, I told Vance and Isabel. And Lawson. But judging by how easily the half-bloods had been fooled by Velkas, the evil fairy lord promising immortality, they'd believe any rumor. The last thing I needed was a reputation amongst them as well as the mercenaries. "I'm not asking you to go into their territory," said Vance. "Merely meet a representative at their gate. Tell them you're there on behalf of the Mage Lords as a human intermediary." "What? Everyone thinks I'm a witch." "You aren't registered." Not this crap again. I rolled my eyes. "I thought it didn't matter. I thought you trusted me." That stung. Never mind how he planned to send me running into danger. If not for his being here, I'd probably be off raiding a troll's nest. No. He was acting like a significant portion of the last 2 weeks never happened. "It matters to the fairies," said the Mage Lord. "I doubt they'd mind if you were. Witches have no arguments with half-bloods." "We do," I muttered. "Do I get compensation for running risks? You promised me a contract." "Yes, I did," he said, looking almost insulted. "I'll draw up the contract, but I'll be nearby when you meet with them anyway, just in case." "Just in case they decide to skewer me. How thoughtful." Vance frowned, moving one step closer. "You don't think I've considered your safety?" "Half-blood territory and safety don't fit into the same sentence, Vance," I said. "Yes, I'll do it. But I'd prefer it if you didn't criticize me for taking risks and then send me running into one of the most dangerous places in town." "Point taken. Anything else you'd like to add?" There's only one thing I want from you, Vance. Yes? He lifted an eyebrow again. God damn it. An apology. For not telling you where I was? No. For letting the necromancers take away my cash and force me to spend yesterday evicting piskies from a garden shed. What? I turned away, my face heating up. What I said. I don't want an argument. He paused, hands slightly forward, like he intended to reach out and touch me, but thought better of it. I'll see to the necromancers, he said. For now, I wanted to offer you this assignment. Talk to the Half-Blood Guard. Find out what they know. There's a reason I'm not a diplomat, I said. I'm better at stabbing things than negotiation. The mage lords aren't welcome in their territory, he said. And most are still in Nottingham, making arrangements for the election of a new mage lord. I came back early to be sure nothing had happened in my absence. Did I answer that question? The words came out snappier than I'd intended. Or maybe I had meant it. Dickhead. Ivy. All right, I'll do it, I said. Good. Come and see me at the manor at 10. 11. I have to return a stack of paperwork to clean up. In response to his questioning look, I added, because of the piskies, don't ask. Damn him. There'd been no reason whatsoever he couldn't have called me. Sure, his excuses were solid. He hadn't meant to leave my livelihood up in the air, but it had been damned stupid of me to think a kiss or two meant I was safe. I should know better. I'll sort this out, then come and find you. As you like. I'll be waiting. He turned around, then paused. I apologize, Ivy, for not telling you. I blinked, and he'd vanished. Damn it. He just had to get the last word in. Whoa, said Isabel. I jumped, not realizing she stood behind me. What did tall, dark, and chiseled want? I snorted. Tall, dark, and chiseled. She grinned. Didn't you make out with him before he disappeared? Yes, unfortunately. That bad? Her expression shifted to say, no bullshit. No. Good. Too good. I sighed, brushing my hair over my shoulder. We were supposed to be business partners. No wonder he didn't take me seriously enough to tell me he planned to vanish for a week. Emergency or not, you'd think there'd have been a system in place to deal with people back here who wanted to see him. But the gates to the Major's headquarters had been locked from the inside. Anyway, he's given me a job in Half-Blood territory. He thinks I'm his lapdog, apparently. Reading between the lines, I think he's looking for an excuse to spend time with you. He's asking me to walk into Half-Blood territory again. It's like handing me a Valentine's card with a trip to the gallows printed on it. I think you're exaggerating a little. I'm the only person who can set foot in the place without dying, I muttered. And even that's not a guarantee. Sure, I had my fairy magic, but it didn't mean my survival odds were any higher. I liked my body parts the way they were, thanks. On the whole, this was not how I'd hoped to start the weekend. Chapter 3. 2 hours later, after delivering a stack of paperwork to the cleanup guild and managing to avoid Larson in the process by sneaking in and out through the back door, I rode the bus down to 15 Oak Drive, home of the mages. Or one mage in particular. It still blew my mind that the huge mansion belonged to a single person. The hedges surrounding the place took up as much room as 3 regular houses, while the gardens appeared to stretch on for miles. I tried and failed to count the windows as I waited outside the wrought iron gate, hoping the doorman wouldn't be who I thought it would. You, said a lilting voice. Oh, crap. typical. Ralph the Quarter Fairy glared at me from the shadows. His bright blue eyes narrowed. His too-pretty-to-be-human face wouldn't have looked out of place on the cover of an old-world magazine, if he wasn't scowling like I'd brought a dead rat with me. "You," I said back. "I have an audience with the Mage Lord." I was tempted to ask if he knew what went down in Half-Blood District, but as far as I knew, Ralph had spurned his fairy heritage. Thinking about it, I didn't know anyone else who had. Most half-fairies worshipped their non-human parents who'd left them here to fend for themselves. "Does the Mage Lord know you're here dressed like that?" He looked me up and down, taking in my tattered jeans and blood-stained coat. "Yes," I said through gritted teeth. Generally, Ralph was either trying to stab me or insult me, and I was in the mood for neither. "As I said, I have an invite. Technically, I work here." "You don't." Ralph moved to bar the way. "We don't let hedge witch scum in here." Did he want me to punch him in the nose? I moved until we stood eye to eye. If the Major's standards have slipped enough to let the likes of you in, then... His fist flew at my face. I effortlessly dodged. Apparently, he hadn't inherited a fairy's inhuman speed, and grabbed his fist in my hand, twisting hard. He yelped as his wrist threatened to break under the strain. My fighting methods tended towards hit them until they stop moving, rather than a particular style, but I knew how to bring on the pain. Ralph's eyes went wide, and his free hand dropped to his side. "What the hell? Is that magic?" Blue light flared up around my hands, resting above my arms like a freaking halo. Shit. "Ivy Lane?" I dropped Ralph's hand like it burned me. He made a faint whimpering sound and scrambled away, but the look he shot me was one of disgust and... fear. Shit. He'd seen the fairy magic react to my anger. Apparently, being quarter-blooded meant he still had the sight. Vance sighed. "Are you arguing with my doorman again?" The gate lay open behind him, and I gladly scooted inside. I considered telling him I'd exposed my magic to his guard, but decided against it. Ralph didn't scare me, but I really didn't want word about my fairy magic spreading amongst the mages. "Ivy, if you're going to work here, you need to stop antagonizing Ralph." "He started it," I said. "Seriously, every time it's been him who threw the bait." "Then you shouldn't rise to it." "Yes, oh wise master," I muttered. My heart beat too fast, and traitorous wisps of blue magic clung to my skin. No wonder even Ralph had seen it. I might as well be wearing a neon shirt that told every fairy in the vicinity I was a human with fairy magic. On cue, a small figure ran into the hall. Quentin, Vance's brownie assistant. He glared at me too. "No, I'm not covered in blood this time," I said. "Quit staring." "Give it 5 minutes," said Vance. "Ha ha." I rolled my eyes. "What, do you have a fairy lying in wait to ambush me?" "No, but I do have the contract you requested, though I wouldn't be surprised if you cut your finger on it." Very funny. I looked away, determined not to let him see my reluctant amusement. Now I remembered why I liked the guy. Too bad he'd done enough to piss me off lately. I'd be keeping him at arm's length. Vance led the way into his office. As promised, a straightforward document lay on the desk. I signed beneath Vance's illegible scribble of a signature. "You could have left a message here," said Vance. "It'd have reached me eventually." "Eventually?" I raised an eyebrow. "I stood outside the gate for an hour in the pouring rain, and no one showed up. Was I supposed to sit there all week? I have to pay rent somehow. I hadn't even signed a contract with you at the time. You might have vanished off the face of the earth for all I knew.
I should have explained the situation before I left.
Guess we were preoccupied. I meant with the fairies, and the whole nearly dying scenario, but, well, we hadn't done much talking afterwards either. The gleam in his eyes told me the same thought had crossed his mind, but I refused to acknowledge it.
Did you require a handbook?
He asked. Actually, yes, I said. You can take the piss out of me all you like, but even Larson made the regulations clear on the first day. A shadow fell over his face at the mention of the name.
You took another job from him?
No. He told me to look into half-blood territory. You showed up 5 minutes later, so there was no need to. I glared at him. Don't you dare judge me. You've never been desperate enough to take any job that comes your way, have you? Larson might be an asshole, but at least he gave me enough work to keep a roof over my head. That's more than a lot of people in my position can say.
I did apologize to you. I'll be sure to let you know when I'm leaving town in future.
I looked away. Okay. Can we get this ill-advised trip into Faerie territory over with then?
If you like.
Vance put the paper on the desk, and it vanished into thin air. He wasn't even showing off. He seemed to do it on reflex.
I won't be able to come inside with you.
And he wouldn't be able to help me if I exposed my magic again. It was too much to hope to avoid confrontation. Fairies were contentious on a good day. An awkward silence spread between us as we walked down the hall. I guessed he'd meant he'd walk up to the door to half-blood territory with me, which meant finding more ways to not talk about what had happened before he left. I licked my lips, trying not to remember how good he tasted when he kissed me. So, did all the other mages in this part of town leave? I asked him.
Most of them. The council called for a meeting of every mage in the region to discuss the murder.
There was a tightness to his voice.
The situation proved difficult to resolve. We all nominated candidates who might take up the new position as the leader of the region's mages. Stability is essential in times like these.
And nobody knows who might have done it. A whisper of cold air brushed against my back, accompanying the threat hanging in the air like an imminent storm.
There aren't any suspects. Yet. But we know a half-fairy did it. Their blood was found at the scene.
Fairies never think they need to obey human laws.
Perhaps not, he said softly. But I doubt anyone but a powerful she can outdo a mage lord.
Good point. He'd single-handedly scared every single fairy in Half-Blood District into stopping their fight. How could anyone casually murder someone on the same level? How was he killed? I asked, unable to restrain my curiosity any longer.
Vance said, he was stabbed. The weapon wasn't found at the scene.
Damn. Iron? That'd rule out fairies. Half-bloods can't handle iron even in small amounts.
We aren't sure yet, he said. But there's a chance I might get called out of the city again if new developments are made.
Oh. Okay. It seemed wrong to complain about drawing the short straw job-wise when his colleague had been murdered. Another uncomfortable silence descended, and the chilling atmosphere surrounding the Mage Lord followed us down the path and outside the gates to the manor. Ralph glared at me from beside the entrance again, but didn't make any more snide remarks when he saw who accompanied me. When will the other mages come back? I asked Vance once we were out of earshot. I'm kind of lost on how this whole hierarchy works. There are 5 mage lords, right? I only know you and Drake.
There are 5 per branch, yes, said Vance. Only master mages, the highest level, qualified to apply to join the council.
Master mages? Is that ranked on ability or what?
Experience, said Vance. Most mages are junior level. As for novices, we're running shorter than ever. That's why it's essential to work with the other mage guilds, to ensure we have enough new mages recruited. You have to be born with a gift, right? I asked. Without exception, said Vance. Each new mage is given specialist training from a master with the same gift, or a similar one. So you're a master mage. You make the rules. I turned this information over in my head. Who had trained him? As far as I knew, nobody else had the same space-bending ability Vance did. For this district, yes, he said. That means it's up to me to oversee all use of magic. I meet weekly with the various witch covens, but it's not my job to police what people do in their own homes. And there's never been a clear law when it comes to half-bloods. Mostly because humans can't see fairy magic. Oh boy, here we go. Yes, I can see it. And no, it doesn't mean I can single-handedly police them. I'd rather tag rogue trolls than go on fairy policing duty. They aren't exactly enamored with me at the moment. There have been injuries, attacks in my district, due to their magic. I'm sure you understand the dilemma this puts me in. Fine, I ground out. You've got yourself a deal. I'll poke around. But I expect compensation. I've nearly died in their territory enough times. Larson might not have given me an incentive to risk my neck, but you promised I'd get compensation if one of them bites my foot off. I'd hope you'd be able to avoid such a scenario. Like I said, I'll be on call. But if I didn't know better, there was a hint of worry in his tone. Great. Even the Mage Lord was concerned I'd get attacked. I squashed the warmth that rose inside me at the thought. I needed to be on top of my game today if I was going to talk to the half-fairies. You'd better be, I said. Don't make me regret agreeing to work with you again. You'll never regret it. The arrogant ass. Worse, he was probably right. Half-blood territory was considerably quieter than the last time I'd been here, but I hesitated by the gates, squinting to see if there'd been any new disturbances. By the looks of things, summer had turned up the heat, and sunbeams lit up the grass and flower beds inside. I turned to Vance, but he'd disappeared. Damn. A rustling sounded. I instinctively rested my hand on the hilt of my sword. Irene was strapped to my waist, and I didn't intend to remove her to go into the fairies' territory. I'd made that mistake before. Wisps of fairy magic drifted in the air. Not from me, but from the whole area. The half-fairies had carved out their territory by putting a big-ass spell over it. I sure as hell hadn't expected to spend the weekend hovering around outside the half-blood's hedge, hoping a fire imp wouldn't appear and torch my eyebrows off. Yes, said a clipped voice. A 6-foot-tall, gorgeous elven warrior melted out of the hedge. I stared a moment. He wore a full set of armor, though made of something other than metal, and I felt like I'd walked into a convention for medieval cosplay. His silver hair was feathery soft, and so straight it looked as though he'd ironed it flat. You're Ivy Lane? Yes. Damn, who told him my name? You're the one who closed the veil. Shit, maybe I do have a reputation. I had help. I reminded myself not to say anything that'd get me kicked out. Vance had a point. Someone died here. The half-bloods policed themselves, but I'd never heard of any homicides on their territory. Admittedly, I did my best to avoid this part of town. I'm here to talk about the death that occurred here yesterday, on behalf of the Mage Lords. Our concerns are not yours, human. Figures. They almost were. You nearly set this place on fire yesterday. The Mage Councils give you permission to police yourselves, but considering the Mage Lord himself had to intervene last night,
You're lucky nothing worse happened. Who died?
This would mean very little to you, said the half-fairy. The name of the half-fairy was Varek. He was killed by Faerie, a summer half-fairy.
So the killer had been caught?
Rivalry? Perhaps. The half-fairy looked me up and down. We found—
I know.
Isabel returned to the spell she'd been using on the containers of blood.
This blood, the victim's, tests as normal, by the way. No traces of anything weird. Same with the other victim. So the drug was just in the killer's blood, I said. I saw the murderer's face, but you know I can't tell one half-fairy from another. They're probably hiding.
Guilt gnawed at me all the same. I'd seen a murderer, even if I didn't know who they were, and couldn't warn anyone without getting myself locked away or attacked. Damn. All right, we should go back. I broke off as Vance pulled his phone out. He tapped the screen, then held it to his ear, listening to the person on the other end with a slightly irritated look on his face. His expression froze. Yes, I'll be right there. A beeping sounded as he hung up the phone. What happened? I asked. They caught the person who killed the leader of the East Midlands mages.
Wait, they did?
I suppressed a shiver at the sudden breeze rising up around him. A half-fairy? Or human? Half-fairy. His stormy gaze met mine. This is no coincidence. Do you want me to come with you? Part of me wanted to run for the hills when he wore his "I'm going to murder someone" expression. Is the killer alive? For now. The threat wasn't so much implied as emphasized. I shivered for real this time. I had an inkling the killer, after he ditched me, the idea of telling him about Calder didn't appeal. Sure, I wouldn't be able to fool him for long, but I was too tired, too worn down to slice open those emotional wounds again. My physical wounds were giving me enough grief already. You should consider getting a guard dog of your own. The mage lord stepped away, apparently satisfied I wasn't going to bleed to death. I rolled my eyes. Like a real dog would stand a chance against— That was a joke, wasn't it? She catches on eventually. I feebly swatted at him. Your bedside manner is appalling. You drool in your sleep. Oh, we're back to taking cheap shots. I glanced down at the bandages again. How long am I stuck like this? I put on an extra coating of the healing salve. You'll fully heal in a few hours, but you'll probably find it hard to walk until morning. Morning? At last, far too late, it hit me. I'm in your house. Looks that way, yes. I looked around the room. This is a guest bedroom. I thought you'd appreciate the quiet. How very considerate. It was, actually. More so than I'd have expected. But what the hell did I know? So you did have your phone switched on? Yes. His brow wrinkled again. I was detained for a significantly long time. The East Midlands mages had a disagreement over who to nominate to take the position of the new head mage. The two leading candidates decided a public duel was a way to settle their dispute. A duel? Is that normal? Not unheard of. He waved a hand, and Quentin the brownie ran past, picking up something from the floor. I leaned over to see. More blood-stained cloths and bandages. Whoa. I'd been really lucky this time. So you have experience dueling with magic? The words came out before I could stop them. Shit. What was I asking? More to the point, why?
He was the Mage Lord. He'd probably been dueling since childhood. Wait, where was Irene? I scanned the room and saw my sword leaning against the far wall. Vance's eyes followed my gaze.
Yes, of course, he said, in answer to my question. Why?
I took a deep breath. I may have entered myself into a magical tournament for half-fairies. His gaze snapped back to mine.
What?
I explained what I'd found out on my jaunt into half-blood territory and on my investigation into the trials, except for my encounter with Calder. His name lay on my tongue, but I couldn't speak it, nor how he'd completely crushed my magic. I couldn't begin to make sense of how he'd done it, and Vance wouldn't give me answers. Only pity I didn't want. Yeah, like lying to Vance Colton worked out so great last time. His cool grey eyes studied me when I'd finished speaking.
You used fairy magic to kill Velkas, he said. You're more than a match for any half-fairy.
I was in their realm at the time, though, I said. Magic's stronger there.
And they're in our realm, said Vance. The trials are, right?
Good point.
Idiot.
The blood loss was getting to me. The other half-fairies wouldn't be as superpowered as the son of a former she-lord. They'd be weird creatures, like that spidery fae. Creepy, but not invincible.
You're overthinking it, he said. You're tough. Your magic is strong. I don't see any reason you can't stand up to a half-fairy.
His unexpected expression of confidence in me made me blink. One of them almost killed me right now. Calder, though, was half she, 100 times more powerful than a regular half-blood. I didn't know if any of the other contestants had the blood and magic of a she-lord.
Are you asking me to tell you it's a bad idea?
I was expecting you to, I said.
I thought you needed a self-esteem boost.
Huh? I really look that pathetic? I moved my hands to the bandage on my side and gingerly poked it. Ow. Still not fully healed.
Don't touch it yet, said Vance. If you want the bandages changed during the night, call Quentin.
Wait. Hang on. I'm staying here.
I don't see you going anywhere. Besides, he said, I thought you implied you wanted me to help you prepare for this ill-advised magical bout. The corner of his mouth tilted up. Have I risen one level in your esteem, Ivy Lane?
If you're going to be a dick about it, never mind. I'm tired. I closed my eyes, but arguing with him had made me more alert and pissed off. By the way, the bastard who did this to me is alive and knows I'm human. So don't say I have no reason to fear for my life.
A pause. I never said that.
I turned my head to the wall pointedly, keeping my eyes closed. Eventually, his soft footfalls told me he'd left the room. Bloody Avocus and his mind games. I'd sworn never to fall for them again. Never to let one of them get underneath my skin. I'd only just begun coming to terms with my magic, once Avocus's, and accepting it as my own. How did Calder smother my power? Once I was sure Vance had gone, I pressed my head into the pillow, cursing. Damn the Mage Lord for making this harder than it needed to be. He was the one who nagged me not to fight against the fairies without backup. This was why getting involved with him was a bad idea. He was contradictory, tempestuous, inconsistent, possibly sleeping next door, without clothes on. Damn it, Ivy. On the whole, I'd rather imagine Vance naked than think about Calder or Avocus. But neither would help me sleep. Instead, I tried to sit up and got a nice shock of pain through my left side. Biting down on a cry of pain, I watched the lights on the ceiling swim around for half a minute before the welcome blackness returned, pulling me under. I moved through fog, chasing a voice. Melodic, enticing, it whispered, "Ivy, this way." The fog smothered everything, preventing me from seeing where I walked, though I wasn't sure solid ground rested under my feet. More like I was floating, following the voice. "Come with me, Ivy. We've been waiting for you." Transparent, indistinct figures stared at me from the fog, fading every time I tried to get a closer look. I passed right through one, and an icy chill ran through my bones. So many dead humans. "Where?" I started to shout, then stopped dead. Two figures floated in front of me, a man and a woman. Even though their features were blurred, the familiarity slammed into me like a heavy blow. "Dad," I whispered. "Mum." They watched me, slipping in and out of focus. I cried out as they faded, reaching as though I could pull them back into existence. My hand passed through thick yet insubstantial fog. "Ivy," whispered the first voice. The fog cleared, revealing trees, too tall to see the highest branches. They formed an unbroken canopy, blocking all the light but a faint glow. Shadowy figures moved amongst the trees. "Faerie," I said aloud. "The grey veil." At once, memories filtered through to me. Avacus. His son. I snapped awake, raising my arms to shield my face from the sunlight falling onto the bed through a gap in the curtains. Sitting up, I pushed sweaty hair from my forehead. "He's not here," I muttered to myself. "He's not. His dickhead son thinks you're dead, and he only beat you by a fluke." Concentrating on the knock to my pride, rather than the horror that some part of Avacus survived, I peeled the bandages from my side. Blood stained them, but the skin beneath was unbroken. Another witch magic miracle. I slid off the bed, realizing I still wore the clothes I'd fought Calder in. Either I'd been bleeding too much for Vance to remember to remove them, or he hadn't wanted to undress me while I was unconscious. I didn't want to read too much into that. My jacket was hung over the back of a chair by a cherrywood desk. My shoes lay nearby, and my sword and other weapons were lined against the section of wall next to the door. A mirror over the desk reflected my sorry self back at me. Blood stained my injured arm, my clothes were a ragged mess, and my hair was damp with blood and dirt from where I'd fallen in the alleyway. When I opened the wardrobe in the corner of the room, I found nothing but dust and moths. Great. The room had an ensuite bathroom, at least, so I could wash my face and clean the worst of the blood off. Couldn't do a thing for my clothes, though. I'd have a proper shower when I got home. For now, I shoved my feet into my boots and picked up my daggers, replacing them in the pockets of my leather jacket. I froze when the tinkling sound of a piano reached my ears. Every muscle in my body locked into place. It's not them. It's not. But my body reacted all the same. Breaths coming short, an ice-cold sensation flooding me, and not of the pleasant, magic-related variety. The tune continued to play, eerie and haunting, too reminiscent of another. The Faerie's orchestra had played without end, beautiful and deadly at the same time. Once you were caught in the spell, you danced until your feet were bloody, or until one of the crazed fairies sucked your life essence out, leaving you to rot in a corner. "Stop," I moaned. "Make it stop." My head felt too heavy to move, and panic spread through every inch of me,
even as I knew the music was no spell. I just reacted the same, after all these years, like I hadn't changed an inch from the kid they took into Faerie. Now the shock eased away. It didn't even sound like the fairies. More like an old piano piece. Vaguely familiar. Seeing as I hadn't so much as switched on a radio since the fairies took me, I didn't know which it was. The music stopped abruptly. I remained hunched on the floor, shivering uncontrollably. Fucking fairies. The door opened a minute later. Out of my peripheral vision, I saw Vance. God damn it. The person I least wanted to see me in this state. I straightened upright with as much dignity as I could scrape together. What are you doing? Nothing, I said. You're crying, he said, his expression bemused. No way. I touched a hand to my face and it came away wet. Damn it, Ivy. What was that? I asked. Were you playing the piano? Yes. His forehead crinkled. I've heard my notation is sometimes off-key, but I've never made anyone cry. I hate the sound, I said. He raised an eyebrow. I'll keep that in mind. I'd like to be alone for a minute. More like an hour. Actually, I wouldn't have minded climbing out the window. So much for maintaining my professional reputation. If you insist. He gave me another scan, like he was checking me for new injuries, then turned and left. Call Quentin if you need anything. I have to go home, I said. Isabel's probably... Shit. Where's my phone? But he'd gone. Damn it. I checked my pocket for my phone, then I spotted it on the desk. The battery was dead, which meant I probably had a dozen missed calls, but at least I hadn't permanently broken it when I dropped it in the alley. Shoving the phone into my pocket and grabbing Irene, I all but ran from the room, and then stopped at the end of an empty corridor. How the hell did I get downstairs from here? Not only did I have no ride home, I had to walk around this maze of a manor in clothes that were falling apart. I'd already left my dignity behind in the alleyway, so I zipped my jacket and took off down the corridor. 3 wrong turns later, and I found a small staircase leading downstairs. I half ran, finding myself in the corridor near the conservatory. Doubtless the mage lord would be in there, so I went the opposite way and promptly found myself lost again. Vance probably had a hell of a fun time in here as a kid. A game of hide-and-seek would last for hours. Did he have friends? Most of his family had died in the invasion, so I guessed someone else had raised him. But this place seemed deserted. No sounds of voices followed me. This place was kinda empty, really. So empty, I didn't see anyone coming until I walked smack into Wanda. Shit, sorry. Ivy. Wanda blinked at me. She was Vance's assistant, a frost mage apprentice with a kindly expression and her long, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Oh, I know I look like shit. Apparently my filter had gone walkabout along with my dignity. I got stabbed yesterday, and Vance disappeared before I could get a change of clothes. I'm heading home. I can lend you a shirt if you like, she said. I smiled. Thanks, but really, I need to go. My phone's dead, and my flatmate will be worrying about me. Where's the way out? She pointed. Left. You're almost there. If it helps, the main corridor goes in a square. Ah, okay. Thanks. What happened? A half fairy, I said, pulling my jacket tighter. Thanks again. Let me know if you need anything, she called after me as I ran down the corridor. I wondered how much she knew about the nature of my work for the mages. I was the only witch employee, and it wasn't like I'd had ample opportunity to speak to the others. I breathed a sigh of relief when I found the exit and slipped outside. Nobody seemed to be around, so I relaxed a little. I'd go home, properly clean up, and Isabel's magical cookies would make everything better. Once I reassured her I was alive, and that I planned to have another battle with a half-fairy tonight. Chapter 9. The wards around our flat flared as bright as ever, but the door lay open. Not a good sign. I half ran across the lawn, Irene at my side, and halted as Isabel came outside. "My phone died," were the first stupid words to come out of my mouth. "I'm sorry." "I thought they killed you." She hugged me back, shakily. Her eyes were underscored with dark circles. "Where the hell have you been?" "I'm sorry," I said again. "It was a pretty bad job." I waited until the flat door closed behind us to unzip my jacket. Isabel gasped at the sight of my shredded clothes. "I need a shower, but I promise I'll tell you everything in 5. "You'd better." Her words followed me as I pushed my bedroom door open. I considered my wardrobe and grabbed a fresh outfit and made for the shower. I shampooed my hair 3 times, scrubbing every flake of dried blood from my skin. But I still felt the taint of him. "I won't lose next time," I whispered, my words lost in the pounding of water. I dressed and swept my hair into a ponytail, then went to join Isabel. It didn't take too long for her to be shaking her head at me.
"Ivy, I know you're reckless, but sneaking into an event for half-bloods only? That's
"Mad. I know." I took a half-hearted bite of the pasta meal I'd heated up in the microwave. "But people are dying. The leader of a mage council was murdered. And..." The words stuck in my throat. "And his son nearly killed me." Isabel looked at me curiously.
the leader of a mage council. Whoever it was, they probably got taken off guard. I can't see a part-shifter mage lord who can defy the laws of physics getting beaten by a half-fairy."
My mouth fell open. "Huh?"
She thought I meant Vance might be targeted next. "Ivy, if you're worried about the mage lord, I'm sure he has his own security team."
"I'm not worried about him." Maybe I am now. It sounded like the half-fairy who killed the leader of the other mages had been half-crazed, drunk on the after-effects of the drug. Didn't sound like he'd planned the attack. And Calder hadn't mentioned him either.
"You were at his house last night, weren't you? You don't have to hide anything from me."
Those words were the final trigger that burst the dam. I blurted out the real truth. Everything from Calder attacking me, dampening my magic, and leaving me to bleed out in the alley. Her expression grew more alarmed with every second, until she stood up to pace around the flat.
"Shit, Ivy."
Now I'd told her the full truth of my experiences in Faerie. She knew how much damage Avokas had done, how tenuous my grip on my own magic was. "I'd drop out of the contest, but people are dying." I set my mostly untouched meal aside. "I can't let this slide."
"You nearly died,"
she said.
"Do you know how it felt when you didn't come home? I thought they'd abducted you again."
"I'm sorry," I blurted. I'd already apologized 12 times, but guilt twisted through my guts. "I'm really, really sorry. I never expected I wouldn't make it back. The illusion spell worked perfectly, but I stayed too long. It was fading on the way out. I guess that's why he saw through it. He's half she, too. But the way he used magic, it shouldn't be possible in this realm." He maintained a level of control over his power I'd never seen before, because he'd had the magic his whole life. Who trained him? He'd looked just like Avokas when he'd faced me in the shadows, except
not. He had silver hair, not black, for one thing. His fighting style hadn't been the same. You killed Velkas by a fluke, he'd said. Not, you killed a Vokus. He met Velkas, I said. Maybe they went to Faerie together. He'd worn armor and carried a powerful tree-forged blade, neither of which was easy to get in this realm. Velkas had help, right? Said Isabel. Not just from the necromancers. Good point. The people we questioned when we were trying to find out who took those kids kept mentioning a half-fairy with silver hair and an ash blade, I said. A half-fairy. Velkas was a pure-blooded she. Maybe this guy used to be his lapdog. It explained a lot. He was carrying on with Velkas's lies. Immortality. Did he want to open a way back to Faerie too? Most likely. Velkas's ultimate goal had been to build an army and make even summer and winter bow to him. He'd wanted to steal Avocus's power long before he'd set his sights on the mortal world. Calder, on the other hand, he wasn't pure Faerie, no matter how much control he had over his magic. If I wanted to beat him, I needed to learn the heart of my own magic and use against him. I wouldn't be blindsided again. Assuming I survived the trials without anyone realizing who I was, I might be able to sneak up on him. I drew in a breath. Isabel watched me with a worried expression. He'll think I bled to death in the alley, I said. If my half-fairy disguise is good enough, he won't guess it's me when I show up tonight. I can wear a costume. Some of the half-fairies did. Isabel shook her head. You aren't going to back down on this, are you? Can you at least not walk in there alone? The Mage Lord wants you to stay in one piece, right? He'd never be able to sneak in, I said. Unless you made 2 disguises, but I'll need one every night this week if I make it to the final round of the contest. I don't have enough ingredients for 2 people. Isabel shook her head again and crouched beside the spell circle still set up on the floor. I might be able to do you a fancier design, but you'll have to tell me what you want to look like. I will do. I should probably call Vance. I kind of freaked out this morning and ran home without telling him I was leaving. She turned her head to me. You were at his house alone? In a guest room, I said. And probably not alone. His place has enough rooms to host every mage in the whole town. I had to wait to heal up before I left. Nothing happened with us. Nothing aside from him seeing what a wreck I really was, under the surface. Getting close to him, letting the lines between professional and personal blur. Even if I was okay with it, part of me belonged to Faerie. Last night had reminded me just how deep its influence ran. I walked to the kitchen to retrieve a batch of Isabel's cinnamon and awesomeness-flavored cookies, and watched her reset the spell circle, muttering under her breath. Crap, I said. I forgot. Is there a way to make me be able to understand the fairies' language? Isabel looked at me. What? They use these glyphs, I explained. Not like those. Different ones. I indicated the book she'd left open on the armchair, with symbols drawn onto its yellowing pages. In their own language. No, said Isabel. Not that I know of. Spells involving words usually end up backfiring. Not for fairies, I said. They can put a tongue-tying spell on to stop you speaking, or curse you to speak in riddles forever. Don't worry, there's nothing like that at the trials, I added. They're just duels. No permanent injuries allowed. Unless a creepy bastard fae ambushes you again. Her hands curled into fists. I think you should sneak in an explosive spell, or 3, just in case. Spells get knocked loose too easily, I said. I lose enough of them. And daggers. The only reason I still owned a substantial collection was because I got a significant discount from the Mercenary Guild's weapons trader. And that might not last, if Larson decided my working for the Mage Lord was a threat to his own business. Irene was the one weapon that had lasted me longer than a few months, and leaving her behind tonight would make me feel like I walked into the arena stark naked. Isabel sighed. I'll think of something. What do you want your disguise to look like? I called myself Shadow when I signed up, I said. Guess I should have considered possible costumes first. I can work with it. Her brows pinched together, in the thoughtful expression she got when she had an idea. If she hadn't been born a witch, I could have seen her working in fashion design. She never judged me for walking around in torn-up jeans and blood-stained leather jackets, but jumped at the chance to test out her skills. My phone buzzed from where I'd plugged it in to charge. A message from Vance. What are you doing? We're setting up the disguise spell, I messaged back. Come to the manor. I need to talk to you. Well, that was instructive. Vance asked me to come to the manor. Good. Isabel paced around the circle. Ask him if he knows a better way to catch the person selling the drug than sending you to your death. Will do. I slipped the phone into my pocket. I'll be back in a few hours. Saying goodbye over my shoulder, I grabbed my jacket and sword and left the flat. Chapter 10. This time, nobody waited outside the manor. I hesitated, half expecting Ralph to appear and shove me away, but the gate opened immediately. Mage magic. Shaking my head, I walked into the front garden and tried to figure out what the hell I was going to say to Vance. Like the gate, the door opened the instant I rang the doorbell. Vance waited in the hall, dressed surprisingly casually, in a plain t-shirt and slacks. It was the first time I'd seen him in anything other than a fitted suit. It threw me off, considering he'd been in uptight mage lord mode ever since he'd reappeared after being gone for a week. What is it? I asked. You disappeared this morning. So did you, I said. Literally. What's the issue? Nothing, he said. You called me here for nothing. What game was he playing this time? I called you here because you mentioned needing assistance preparing for your match tonight. We can talk in my office. He led the way, pushing open the wooden door with one hand. Thought you said I could beat off a fairy dog in my sleep, I said. Your style of fighting isn't anything like Faerie's anyway. Oh, really? The sword appeared in his hand so fast I jumped back. Fairies can manipulate matter and take you by surprise. He spun the blade in one hand in a way that would be considered a safety hazard if anyone else was doing it. Are you challenging me to a duel? I asked. Because this is a long-winded way to go about it. Have you ever duelled with a half-fairy? I considered this. Depends what you mean by duel. I have the same kind of magic as they do, and more skill with a blade than most. And modesty. Hark who's talking. Honestly, I wasn't confident at all. The encounter with the blasted half-she had shaken me up. Didn't change the fact that I'd be fighting an adversary with unknown skills tonight. From what you said yesterday, you needed my help. You're going to hold it over my head forever, aren't you? I groaned. Tell me if you're challenging me to a duel or just being a pain in the arse. I've a fairy underground to infiltrate. His smirk disappeared. Not without preparing. Are you being a dick to give me an incentive to kick your ass because it's working? No. So you're just being a dick in general? Good to know where we stand. You're putting yourself in danger, he said. I'm considering ways to mitigate the risk. Bulletproof armor? A taser? Ivy. He stopped. I think you should wear a protective mark.
It'd allow me to watch you from a distance and sense if you were in danger. I gaped a little. He wanted me to wear a mark? Those spells weren't the sort the witches handed out to everyone. He'd have bought a specially commissioned batch right from the head of the coven. If I can't be there in person, it's the next best option. Please, he said. I'd prefer it if you wore the mark. If you needed me, you'd just need to touch it. I doubt your phone would survive a magical battle. It's survived plenty. The words came out automatically. I didn't know which surprised me more, the please or the admission that he wanted to make sure I wasn't hurt again. I mean, what the hell was I supposed to say? Is this normal? No. That's helpful. If the Faerie saw it, they'd know I was an intruder. I can mark you somewhere they won't be able to see. Whoa. Get your mind out of the gutter, Ivy. The hint of a smirk touched the edge of his mouth. Unless you're planning on stripping off in front of the half-fairies, there's no shortage of hiding places. You. What? His eyes glittered with amusement. The idea of me seeing you naked bothers you. Yes. My face heated up. God damn it, he must have seen part of me naked when he'd bound up my injuries. The top half, at least. Oh, boy. I kept my gaze on his face. Because it's none of your business. You're my boss. I said this more for my own benefit than his. A reminder. Right. He moved in closer, and I had to remind myself to keep breathing normally. Whereabouts would you prefer me to mark you? I hesitated. My left shoulder. My right was the scarred one, but he'd probably seen my scars already while I was unconscious. I sat down in the chair he indicated. His hands brushed against my collarbone, easing my top down. Goosebumps rose where he touched, his hands cool against my burning skin. He was so damned tall, even more so now I was sitting close. Too close. Focus. You'll be dueling him in a few minutes. Could I best him in a fight? Maybe. I'd beaten bigger, more deadly opponents, but not those with the ability to manipulate space and make the world itself do as they commanded. To have such a power must feel like being a god. I shouldn't be surprised Vance always acted above everyone else. I definitely shouldn't enjoy the sensation of his hand resting against the small of my back as the other drew the symbol. There. His face was inches from mine, his breath warm on my cheek. My heart, traitorous thing, stuttered. Doesn't hurt a bit. No. I breathed out. If I moved a few inches to the left, tilted my head just so, our lips would touch. Even at this distance, shivers danced through my nerves. Instead, I stood so rapidly he moved out of the way. Thanks. I tugged my top up, covering the mark. Don't you want to look at it? I can fetch a mirror. It doesn't matter. A flash of light, and he held a mirror in his left hand. Now you're just showing off. Do you want to look? He repeated, holding the mirror up. The imprint of his touch remained on my skin, tingling. The mark, however, was only a faint red circle, barely noticeable. Thanks. You're welcome. The mirror vanished with one flick of his hand. If you really want my assistance, I have the afternoon free. Wait, you do? I squinted at him. No top-secret meetings? Apparently, the East Midlands Majors managed to come to an agreement in my absence. They've chosen a new leader. Good. I faltered on the verge of asking how he'd become leader. Then I remembered how he told me he killed the last one.
Now probably wasn't the time to start digging into painful subjects. I still hadn't told him about Calder. So, about this training, where? Outside, he said. If we're dealing with magic, the house has too many defensive spells on it. Okay. A dozen possible questions came to mind, but I was here to figure out my magic, not indulge my dangerous curiosity about the Mage Lord. He turned and led the way down the corridor into the conservatory. At the back, a glass door led into the wide garden. Carefully mowed lawns extended into the distance, but the section of grass he approached bore the telltale marks of magic. The grass had mostly been burned or trampled, and remnants of spells buzzed in the air. Do you want to train with weapons or hand-to-hand? Not all your opponents will use magic, will they? No, but it's all I can use, aside from hand-to-hand, I said. Fairies don't fight with metal weapons in general. Same goes for half-fairies. The two I've seen so far were a troll and a giant spider. It's magic I need to practice. Against what? A blunted sword appeared in his hand. Some of the half-fairies will probably use weapons. Yeah, I guess so. I left Irene at the arena's side. The odds of me actually landing a hit on Vance were pretty low, but I'd rather use a fake weapon. I considered him, this time through the eyes of an aggressor. I figured I'd pick out his weaknesses, only I wasn't sure he had any. His body was corded muscle, strong, toned, and flexible. He'd moved fast enough to astonish me, even when I'd been under the influence of fairy magic and operating on superhuman speed. But I didn't think he was superhuman, aside from the shifter blood. No, he was just unfairly perfect. Let's face it, I was screwed. What the hell had I gotten myself into? Okay, we'll start with weapons. I needed to get my focus back, and dueling Vance would snap my head back into fighting mode. And then you want me to use magic? Vance looked at me expectantly. Not displacing, I said. I imagine you'd find it funny to teleport me to random places, but even the fairies in this realm respect the laws of physics. Most of the time. He chuckled. That wasn't the plan, but you're giving me ideas. Remember what I said during the fight with the half-fairy spirits? I nodded. You said I used magic defensively, not offensively. But I did use it offensively to bring down Velkas. I need to work out how to do so without access to the fairy realm, and without killing anyone. It's not allowed. Since I'd killed Velkas, I'd been aware it had taken a hell of a lot of work to reprogram my old belief that Evocus's magic was a dangerous, alien thing, not a part of me. Even more so now Calder had humiliated me. The shame rolling through me had nothing to do with Calder being related to the dickhead who'd ruined my life, and everything to do with the fact that I'd been thoroughly schooled. Magical combat, Vance said. I'll see what I can do. Combat seems to be the key to turning your instincts from defensive to offensive. Yeah, because I'm usually fearing for my life. Or pissed off. It feeds on emotion. Most magic does, to some extent, he said. That's why mages need to stay in control. Really? I thought his shifter powers were the reason he was so uptight. Then again, carrying around the amount of power he did must have some side effects. Maybe training with him was a mistake. But if anyone could give as good as he got in magical combat, it was Vance Colton. Problem was, if I spent too much time here, I might start getting other ideas about how to spend time with him. Dangerous, appealing ideas. I turned to the Mage Lord. All right, let's dance, pretty boy. Pretty? Vance sounded insulted. He wasn't a fairy, that was for damn sure. He was probably the same height as one of them, but even the Fae warriors carried a certain delicateness to their fine-boned features.
Nothing about Vance Colton could be called delicate, from his broad-shouldered frame to the carved lines of muscle visible through his skin-tight shirt. He raised an eyebrow at me. Ready? You look lost in thought. Worried? Worried about facing a horde of angry half-fairies? Me? I faked a smile, readying my sword. We circled one another, neither willing to make the first strike. I knew as soon as I did, he'd block me, so I watched for an opening. There wasn't one. This is a duel, not a dance-off, I muttered, feeling like an idiot. A dance-off, he repeated, amusement flickering in his expression. God, just hit me already. I was prepared for the hit, but I staggered back several steps as I blocked him. He grinned at me. Regretting this? Not a chance in hell. I stood my ground, already sweating. I'd sworn not to use my magic to give myself enhanced speed, but it was tempting right now. Damn, he was good, even without using his ability. He moved fast, fluidly, fighting equally well with both hands. I held him off only because my style tended to work best when I was on the defensive. The blunted end of his sword touched my throat. Do you surrender? This is where I'd use magic and blast you. And if I blocked it? I barely held back a flinch. Blocked my magic. Or smothered it. Damn Calder. Most fairies can't fight with swords. The odds of me coming up against one who can are pretty low. That's not a good attitude to have, he said. Odds in your favor are not. You'd be dead. All right, sir. I rolled my eyes. Just being honest. I know, I thought, angry with myself for giving ground. Ivy? Want to try again? Damn him. Sure. I lost again because I was so rattled. And again. Finally, I threw the practice sword aside. Hit me with magic. What? You're giving up? Magic rose, blue smoke wrapping around my arms. I'd never used it to attack anyone other than a fairy, let alone someone who wouldn't see my attack coming. Aha. Call me petty, but I wanted to try this. Hit me with magic. I meant it. Go on. He searched my face, then tossed his own sword to the side. Unlike mine, it vanished before it hit the ground. If you insist. Solid air smacked into me, sending me flying, the magic slipping from my grasp. I skidded on the grass, struggling to breathe. The atmosphere tightened, like a storm was about to break over my head. Sucking in air, I pulled my tendrils of magic close to me again, and focused on just how pissed off I was. This time when he hit me, it bounced off the shield. Oh, hell yeah. Looked like fairy and mage magic could face up to one another. Encouraged, I used the few seconds I'd won to gather more magic into my hands. The power came from me, and I didn't need to be in fairy to use it. Another hit from Vance knocked me back a few steps. And again. My shield worked okay, but the magic refused to solidify for long enough for me to turn it into anything resembling a weapon. Damn it! I'd have to use my enhanced instincts until my magic decided to cooperate. Change of plans, I said. Let's make this a free-for-all. Hand-to-hand, weapons, whichever. That's a mistake. I waved a hand. This bloody magic's refusing to turn into a weapon. I can't fight you with a shield. Ivy, I know you can do better than this. I've seen you. I'm not having a great day. Something about life-or-death stakes kills the mood. Then don't think about it. I snorted. Don't think about the life sentence hanging over your head. Sure, I can do that. Don't you remember what I told you? Offensive magic is usually the reflection of the defensive mode of a spell. I can't see your magic. But I've seen it before. I know. I dropped my hands to my sides. Yeah? Well, there was a shitload of death energy back when the veil was opening. All the half-fairies were crazily overpowered. It's not normally like that in this realm. You don't need to be overpowered. You just need to find an opening. Like I said, I'm better at hand-to-hand combat. Or using a sword, but I wouldn't have one in the arena. Then I'll allow both. Like you make the rules. I held my tongue. He didn't have to stand here taking crap from me. He'd walked away from a precarious situation with the other mages to save my life yesterday. The warmth conjured by the realization did emphatically not fuel my magic, so I turned my thoughts back to last night instead. Maybe fear did work as a tool after all. I could defend myself against Hellhound's magic, which was effectively a blast of emotion. What Calder had done wasn't all that different. I'd let myself get taken off guard, but I wouldn't let it happen again. Vance nodded, apparently reading more in my expression than I'd intended to give away. Then the air shifted again. I stood my ground, dug my heels in, and let the magic flow to my hands. Without my weapons, there was no barrier between me and the blue light igniting around me. We were one. I leaped forward, rolling to my front and grabbing the practice sword in the process. As I ran at Vance, my barrier smacked into the current of air stirring around him. So he was using a defensive magical shield too. I let my frustration and anger simmer, and the blue light grew brighter, the shield becoming more distinct. I watched for an opening, certain he couldn't use his power indefinitely. The shimmering air in front of me seemed to be running on autopilot, which gave me an idea. He was shielding, which meant if I got him to use his magic to attack me, he'd be wide open to a frontal assault. I continued to circle him, concentrating on the blue shield in front of me. Come back, I told it, and at the slightest gesture, the smoke crept up my hands, the shield's glimmer fading slightly. Vance's eyes narrowed, telling me he'd been watching for exactly this kind of opportunity. He wanted me to attack him directly, so my shield would drop and he'd be able to knock me down. Because he couldn't see my magic, he had to guess what I was doing. I must have given it away with my body language. I couldn't be sure the same would work for him, but one of us had to break first. I put myself into the position I'd been in when I'd taken down Velkas. I'd wielded magic like a winter she. Keeping both hands on the practice sword, I met his gaze, refusing to give anything away. At the same time, I concentrated on my simmering anger until my hands blazed, and the shield was barely existent anymore. If he attacked me now, no magic would defend me. That wasn't my plan. My magic crackled loose and slammed into his shield. As he raised a hand to retaliate, turning the displaced air into a weapon, I used my enhanced instincts to leap high, higher than he'd aimed the attack. I knew it! He could only displace one thing at a time. Before he could block me with another shield, I flipped and landed in front of him, pointing the sword at his neck. Game over. He stared. Then his mouth twisted in a smirk. You said you wouldn't carry your sword. I'd punch you in the throat then. I grinned back. Or kick you in the crotch. Half-fairies have the same sensitive area as we do. I thought you weren't relying on the sword. He grabbed it from my hand. Hey, I protested. You can't steal away my victory. Defend yourself with magic. Air slammed into me, sending me head over heels. I yelped, landing on my back on the lawn, and Vance tackled me, pinning my legs down. You didn't even try. You didn't give me a chance to. I tried feebly to get up, but he held me down with no apparent effort. He wasn't even using magic, damn it. Instead, I was very
very aware of his body pressing into mine, sending heat rushing to places I didn't need to be thinking about during a fight. Before I could shove him off me, his finger lightly brushed a strand of hair out of my face, lingering on the curve of my neck.
Tell me what you're thinking.
I breathed in, unintentionally inhaling his thick, masculine scent, tinged with sweat and muskiness. His eyes darkened, a heated spark brewing within. I'm thinking, you're stopping me from standing up.
Something's bothering you, he said.
Of course. He wasn't trying to seduce me, only get information out of me. And it was working, damn it. I wanted to spill all my secrets. I'll tell you, if I survive tonight. I wasn't sure if I meant I'll tell you about Calder or something else entirely. Like, I'm attracted to you, and that's a bad idea. The worst idea. He released me and stood up.
Tell me about the other contestants. Give me a better idea of what technique to use.
I shrugged. An evil giant spider with a poisonous sting, and fairy warriors, summer and winter ones. Unless we kidnap someone from half-blood territory, we won't be able to do an exact impression.
I'm good at improvising, he said. Let's begin.
Chapter 11. How was it? Isabel asked. I closed the flat door behind me. He's thorough, I'll give him that. I picked yet another leaf out of my hair. When I'd told him summer fairies attacked using forces of nature, he'd thrown me into a hedge. Thorough, huh? She arched an eyebrow, and I threw a leaf at her. Get your mind out of the gutter. I tossed my coat aside and kicked off my shoes. Admittedly, Vance was a good teacher. I could tell why he was in charge of the other mages' training in magic. It came as no surprise to learn he'd had tutors in swordplay all his life, too. Magic or not, skill with a weapon put you a cut above the rest. Literally. So I didn't feel as bad about him beating me every round. Much. My competitive nature protested, but I hadn't exactly learned in an orthodox way. A fellow prisoner in Faerie had taught me how to kill, and by the time I'd come back into this realm and taken up a freelance position at Lawson's place, my instincts were stuck on stab it until it stops moving. Not so good when I actually had to leave my opponent alive tonight. At 8, I stepped into Isabel's spell circle again, and she set up the new disguise spell. This time she held the mirror up, so I could see my transformation. Shifting my feet from the circle's edge, I watched as a shimmering curtain dropped over me, distorting my reflection. Isabel muttered words in the ancient language, while sprinkling a handful of glittery dust around the circle's perimeter. Shivers ran down my arms, along with a sensation like water trickling down my spine. My reflection blurred around the edges, darkening until a weird, shroud-like garment covered most of my body. My face beneath the hood came into focus. Blue, glittering eyes stared back. This time, the person in the mirror was a total stranger. While the first illusion had been a summer fairy version of Ivy Lane, the woman I'd turned into was sharp-featured and feral-looking, like a wildcat given human form. I held no weapons, but winter magic practically pulsed from my skin. The blue-green glow from before had sharpened to icy blue, like a frozen lake, the same color as my eyes. I pushed the hood down and ran my fingers up the ears, pointing between fine strands of black hair. "Damn," I said. My voice came out soft, quietly cold, like the tinkle of fingertips on a piano. It creeped me out. "You outdid yourself this time, Isabel." Isabel backed away from the circle. Holy shit. She put down the glass container she'd been holding. Now I get it. They're scary as hell. Are you sure you want to fight that? She pointed at the reflection in the mirror rather than at me, which I kind of appreciated.
Don't worry, I said. The half-fairies don't all look like this. I'm supposed to be freaky and intimidating. You really delivered on it. I climbed out of the circle. I owe you for this. Big time.
Save it for when you get back.
Her hands twisted nervously.
Please, please be careful. I don't like that you have to leave your weapons behind.
They'll detect the iron, I said. Even last time, if anyone had touched me, they'd have known about Irene. Maybe that's how the half-she saw through the illusion.
I didn't say his name. Didn't dare think he might show up tonight. If he'd returned to the alleyway and found me gone, would he assume I'd survived somehow? A depressing number of deaths went unreported here in the suburbs, especially humans. Non-supernaturals caught in a world they no longer fitted into. And I was about to walk into its darkest underbelly. Again. The doorbell rang. My nerves spiked, and I found myself shivering. Showtime. Vance's jaw hit the floor when I walked out.
Don't say a word, I said.
He blinked a couple of times, shock evident on his features.
How's the mark? Still there.
I tapped my shoulder. It was weird touching a body that didn't seem to be there.
Where will you be? Nearby. The mark will activate when you touch the exact center 3 times. Got it.
I drew in a breath. I can do this.
We should go.
He nodded, resting his hand on my arm. I'd never seen him this hesitant around me. Fairies didn't scare him in the slightest.
Are you ready? He asked.
I knew he didn't mean, are you ready to leave? But, are you ready to fight them? Our bout earlier had had mixed results, and I wasn't entirely sure I could handle my magic well enough to take on someone who'd used it all their life.
I can fight,
I said.
I'm more worried about being found out. It's not like I have an encyclopedia of Faerie. If I get put on the spot and say the wrong thing, you're masquerading as a shadow. Nobody will speak to you. They'll be too intimidated. They're half-fairies, I said. Trust me, I'm like a fluffy kitten in comparison to some of the fairy kind.
He half-smiled, shaking his head.
I said you were overthinking it. Save the I told you so's for after.
His hand tightened on my arm, and the hallway was replaced by a street. I inhaled the cool night air. We'd landed 2 streets down from the venue. I expected Vance to let go of my arm and disappear. I didn't expect him to wrap his other arm around me, pulling me against his chest. I froze. How the hell was I supposed to respond? Not by kissing him again. He'd nodded when I'd said we were employer and employee, but this position was anything but professional, not least because I didn't even look like me. He released me.
Good luck, Ivy.
I barely had time to blink before he vanished. Whoa. I half ran to the alley, not stopping when I passed by the part I'd nearly died in. This section of town was abandoned, but someone had cleaned up the blood from last night. I averted my eyes and speed-walked to the back entrance. I can do this. Acting tough was part of my game. Nobody in here would recognize me in a million years. Maybe not even Calder. I hoped not. Back into the dark. I moved swiftly, following the trail of voices into the auditorium. This time, it was already set up with the seats in place around the room's edges. I searched out the other contestants, my heartbeat kicking in. No hiding this time. I had to stand out in the open. Seeing the hobgoblin, I stalked over to him, head held high. My shadowy cloak billowed around me,
and more than a few heads turned in my direction.
"Shadow," said the hobgoblin. "You're intending to show your face this time?"
"Only if I lose," I said, in my new, strange, cold voice. "And I don't intend to." I eyed the other contestants, sizing them up. Aside from the spider, and a short figure who looked like he might be part gnome, all the others were human-sized. But they varied, from a tall woman in armor to a short, red-headed guy who hardly looked older than 14, bouncing on his heels like he was eager for the trials to start. As the noise levels quietened, the hobgoblin directed everyone's attention to the center of the arena, where glyphs had appeared in the air. This time, I knew what was coming.
"The first match of the night," the hobgoblin began, "pits Shark against Boulder."
A tall, grinning male half-fairy skipped into the arena, followed by a bigger, slower one. Half-ogre, I guessed, judging by his green, mottled skin.
"The second match," said the hobgoblin, "pits Shadow against Razor."
Razor, to my surprise, was a female winter half-fairy, wearing a mask over the lower half of her face. Her long, curly black hair was tied up and tossed over her shoulder, and she wore casual clothes rather than armor. I'd have to wait to see what tricks she had up her sleeve. Once the other matches were announced, the arena cleared to make room for the first bout. Shark didn't appear intimidated by his half-ogre opponent, and circled him, grinning. Then he struck. I winced inwardly as Shark ran headlong into Boulder's fist, falling flat on his back. The half-ogre roared and pounced, pinning him flat and pounding his giant fists into the other half-fairy's face. Blood and spittle flew as Shark spat out broken teeth. So much for an intimidating name choice. Shark's head snapped back as Boulder punched him in the jaw. I winced a little. A normal human might have easily died. Half-fairies, however, were made of stronger stuff than mortals. Shaking his head, Shark spat out more teeth and attempted to roll to the side and throw the half-ogre off. He might as well have tried to move concrete with his fingers. Boulder grabbed him by the throat and lifted him into the air, throwing him bodily across the arena. Ouch! The smaller half-fairy hit the dirt again, and cries of delight followed. The crowd wanted blood. And they got some. When Shark pushed to his feet, Boulder punched him in the face again, which now resembled a battered piece of meat. His nose looked broken, and blood poured from his mouth. But he was still inexplicably grinning. Then a pair of new teeth grew, right before my eyes, punching through his lower lip. A second set shot upwards, his mouth stretching unnaturally sideways. A ripple of surprise spread through the crowd. Boulder stared at him, fists at his sides. Shark caught him totally off guard when he jumped, delivering a vicious kick to the knee that sent the half-ogre down. The still grinning Shark caught Boulder's next punch and sank his teeth into the other fairy's hand. Right through to the bone. Boulder howled with pain. Shark's teeth bit deeper until blood bubbled up, and the half-ogre's wails reached a high pitch. He flailed his good hand, but couldn't land a hit. Crimson drops spattered the ground. Shark let go, withdrawing his blood-stained teeth, and went for the neck. Boulder froze, the other fairy clinging to his shoulders, teeth inches away from severing a vital artery. I didn't hear his surrender because the crowd roared, blasting my eardrums. They'd come for a show and got one all right. Grinning a red-stained smile, Shark skipped away. If this hadn't been a contest, I had no doubt he'd have ripped out the half-ogre's throat. The hobgoblin shouted over the noise, his voice amplified.
"The second match will begin in a moment.
Introducing Shadow and Razor. Oh boy. I'd witnessed the trials in their brutal reality, but it was too late to turn back. I clenched my fists at my sides and walked into the arena. Cheers and shouts trailed after me. I paid the audience no attention, too busy trying to figure out my opponent. Razor. Why the name? She might not look impressive, but I'd be a fool to assume she didn't have a hidden plan. So did I. Keeping my head high, I assessed her, planning my move. With magic-enhanced speed, I'd probably be able to take her down. She didn't carry any weapons. Her leather jacket would provide some cushioning if I knocked her to the ground, but not enough. Magic thrummed through the air, reacting to my nerves. Here, surrounded by magic and shadows, I could almost believe I was there again. Rather than letting it paralyze me, I imagined the arena to be like a shadowy area of the Grey Vale, the clearing where I'd killed Velkas. The magic seemed to like that, growing brighter, flaring from my hands like blue fire, sliding along my body. Razor stalked towards me, wielding magic of her own. Snowflakes began to fall over her head, and she hurled a handful of winter magic at me. Icy shards split the air, and I rolled to the side to avoid them. My own magic remained in its unwieldy form, but I had no time to concentrate. She'd left her right side open, and I aimed a kick at her ribs. Wintry air slammed into me, forcing me to flip and land on my feet. I pulled my own magic into a rippling shield, and then directed it outward, but I hadn't drawn enough power in to do more than make her step back. I advanced on her, my feet moving with the swift speed the magic gave me. With one swipe, I swept her legs out from underneath her. Razor's hands hit the ground to break her fall, and a fountain of what looked like water poured out, crossing the floor. Oh, shit. I was forced to jump to avoid it, but the flood didn't stop at me. The icy water spread to cover the whole area we stood in, solidifying into ice. Damn. I walked carefully, the ground slippery underfoot, cursing inwardly. I didn't dare do any fancy tricks with the floor like this. Irritation, anger, and fear churned inside me, and my magic appeared equally unruly. Razor's feet left the ground, and she leaped at me. I raised the magic in a clumsy shield and knocked her aside. Only then did I see the sharp edges to her boots. Damn it! Of course she wouldn't have given herself a disadvantage with the slippery floor. I hovered on the balls of my feet and sent out a blast of energy she easily dodged. Hand-to-hand would be trickier with the floor this slippery, but not impossible. Throwing another handful of magic, I let her dodge, anticipated her landing, and jumped. I crashed into her, knocking us both off our feet. She wriggled beneath me, the ice helping her to roll free. Before she could pin me, I punched the joint of her arm hard enough to break it. She snarled, kicking out, and I saw the double function of those razor shoes. Damn! She managed to break free of my hold and launched to her feet, aiming a kick at my knee. I dodged, skidding out of range. The half-fairy raised both hands and called up a torrent of magic. It glanced off my shield, and she snarled. I stepped sideways, my feet skidding again. When she launched another magical assault, I ran forward, using the momentum of the slippery ice to leap into the air, avoiding her attack. My fist struck her collarbone, and I jabbed her in the ribs with another strike. Razor went down, feet slipping from underneath her. The collapse took me by surprise, and I didn't react fast enough to stop her spiked foot coming up and hitting my arm. I felt the material of my jacket tear underneath the illusion and yanked my hand away. Not fast enough. She moved sideways, sending me crashing onto my back, and her spiked foot came at my face. With no time to move my head, I raised my hand. Pain exploded in my arm, the spike tearing through the flesh of my wrist. Swearing, I rolled aside, barely dodging another stab, and retaliated by kicking at her knee. My wrist burned with pain. Pain. Wait. Avocus's magic fed on pain. I should get a boost. My shield brightened, blocking another magical assault. Her mask had torn free, and Razor bared her teeth at me, kicking viciously. The pain made me clumsier, too slow to dodge, and the sharp edge of her shoe ripped open the knee of my jeans. I felt warm blood trickle down my shin underneath the illusion. I need to finish this fast. Drawing on the pain, the magic's glow burned brighter, turning into a blue stream of energy. Pain. Not just my pain. Wait, I could draw on the others too. Boulder lay in a miserable heap at the arena's side, while Shark's mouth dripped blood. Razor herself moved awkwardly, like I'd cracked a rib. Their pain made my magic burn brighter, and this time my attack actually knocked her flat onto her back. I approached, seeing my reflection in her eyes. A fairy warrior edged in blue light. The crowd's whispers filtered through, especially the other contestants. They knew something was screwy. If I kept drawing on their pain like this, if Calder was here, he'd immediately know who I was. As far as I knew, nobody else had the same ability. I'd been an idiot not to realize sooner. I continued to let the power flow through me, but directed it into forming a shield instead. Rather than hitting her with magic, I tackled her around the waist, knocking her flat. Her nose broke beneath my knuckles. Blood spurted between my fingers, and she screamed. I twisted her arm behind her back, hard, and used my other arm to elbow her in the ribs. She broke free of my hold, blood dripping down her face, and tried to kick me again. Sharp pain ran down my leg, but I'd already kicked her viciously in the shin. She was forced to put weight on her uninjured leg, and her moment's hesitation gave me the chance to get in close and bring my knee up to strike her chin, hard enough for her teeth to bite into her lower lip. She fell, not quite unconscious, but halfway there. Blood dripped from her open mouth. Her head dropped to the side. "Razor surrenders," said the hobgoblin. "Damn right she does," I muttered. Ouch. Not exactly how I planned to win, but I'd survived. I limped to the arena's side, blood trickling down both my legs. I sat down on the nearest step, and a fresh bolt of pain lanced through both knees. My wrist continued to sting too. I got lucky this time. 2 guards carried the half-unconscious Razor to join the other injured contestants. The next match pitted Crawler against the red-headed teenage half-fairy. The match was over in less than 5 minutes. Crawler's stinger went into the boy's foot, and he fell flat, writhing in pain. The hobgoblin's assistants carried him from the arena, where someone gave him an antidote. I guess that answered the question of whether the half-troll Crawler had stabbed last night had survived to tell the tale. If people died every night at the trials, there'd be nobody left to compete. From the whispered conversations I'd overheard, a fair number of the candidates had entered previous rounds too. Once he'd stopped foaming at the mouth, the teenage half-fairy ran from the arena, towards the exit. A weird shivering sensation went through my body. Icy tingles ran up my arms. Not from the cold, from a spell. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the path to the exit was clear. If I stayed for the final match, I'd get caught in the crush when everyone left at the end. I'd told Vance I'd get out as soon as possible. As no one was looking at me, this was my chance to slip away. I crept along the front row. Well, it did fit with my shadowy persona, and disappeared into the gap between the 2 ends of the seating area. Voices ahead froze my steps. I couldn't pretend to be part of the shadows this time, so I did my best to rein in the magic swirling around me. Reacting to something.
Was he here? If he was, I needed to get out. Now! I took a few more steps and spotted the two figures standing in the shadows. One was the teenage half-fairy who just lost the match. The second was a taller summer half-fairy, judging by the greenish glow of magic around his hands. "I'm sorry," gasped the boy. "I didn't know."
"You saw Crawler fight yesterday, you pathetic excuse for a spy." The half-fairy slapped him. "You were supposed to win, you incompetent little whelp. What in the name of the she did you do with the charms?"
Damn! He'd cheated. The boy yelped and stumbled over his own feet.
"I'll try again next week." "This is the last chance," hissed the other half-fairy. "The very last. Didn't you hear? You've lost your shot. We won't get glory or immortality."
I hung back, heart thudding against my ribcage. Immortality. The half-fairy kicked the smaller guy again, then blasted him with a handful of summer magic. He headed for the exit on light, quick feet. I gave him a head start, then grabbed the teenage boy by the scruff of his neck and dragged him after me. I was improvising, of course, but I'd be a fool not to take the chance to question him. My hand slapped over his mouth as he tried to scream. "Quiet," I hissed, stopping halfway down the corridor, just beside the exit. "Pipe the hell down if you don't want worse than a poisonous spike in your foot." He stared at me with bulging eyes, and I slowly lifted my hand. "What the hell was that about?" I don't know what you mean." "Someone put you up to enter the trials, right?" I said. "What did that guy mean by immortality?" "Nothing,"
he squeaked. "I'm interested." My heart raced, my pulse pounding, but I looked for all the world like one of the half-fairies. He'd never guess my real motive. "Tell me, or everyone will know you cheated." His pale face and watery eyes floated before me as my magic flared up, bright and cold. He leaned away. "Meet me after the matches tomorrow, and I'll show you. I promise." I released him. "If you're lying, I'll know." My menacing fairy voice rang in my ears as he pelted for the exit. I followed more slowly, hoping I hadn't just signed my own death sentence. Chapter 12. I grimaced as Vance pressed a salve to my injured wrist. "You were lucky." I grunted. "Tell me about it." I'd brought him up to speed on everything, apart from the encounter in the corridor. Vance had transported us both to his office in the manor once I'd found him at the road where we agreed to meet. With the illusion gone, none of the half-fairies, leaving the underground, would have guessed my identity, even with the injuries. My knees were a bloody mess, and I'd have to pretend the shredded holes in my jeans were a fashion statement. But it could be worse. Shark could have bitten through my hand, for example. "It sounds like most or other shapeshifters are hiding something." Vance let go of my wrist. I flexed it, standing up from the office chair. Lamplight spilled onto the bookcases and desk, casting the corners in shadow. "Yeah, but they're fairies. It's par for the course." I turned to him, glad not to be wearing a fairy's stupid face anymore. "Speaking of hiding things, I kinda scared one of the contestants into admitting he knew about the immortality drug." Vance's gaze sharpened. "Tell me." I quickly explained the encounter. "I'll have to sneak out early tomorrow again. It's not ideal, I know. Anyone might catch me. Still, it's an opportunity to get right to the heart of this. Or end up face-to-face with Calder again." I shivered. Damn half-fairy. I'd imagined blasting Razor aside with magic, but even in the arena, it was a pale shadow of what it might be in Faerie. Hell, even the other half-fairy's abilities were. Except for Calder. It bugged the hell out of me that I couldn't figure out what made him so powerful. Not just being the son of a she-lord, surely. You can't go alone. I don't have much of a choice, I said. Besides, if I can find a way to expose the illegal drug sellers, they might have to shut down the contest. I wouldn't have to participate in the rest of the trials. Vance studied me. I'd tell you it's risky, but you know that already. I nodded, kind of surprised how things had shifted so quickly. When we'd first met, he'd been incapable of not taking control, and the idea of me running around investigating behind his back grated on his nerves. Judging by his tone, he still wasn't fond of the idea. I really need to learn more about my magic, I said. It's not traditionally winter. I can't throw a blizzard or freeze the floor. I've heard some winter she can freeze the air in a person's lungs and leave them to choke, or turn them into solid ice. I paused, thinking about what I'd done so far. Summon up a shield, check. Blast people with energy, like I'd done to Velkas, check. Throw a bunch of fancy blue light around? Yeah, but not particularly useful. You can fight with it, he said. It's an elemental power, isn't it? Maybe you can train with Wanda. She's a frost mage. I blinked. I guess, but she doesn't know I have fairy magic. He gave me a look I couldn't read. The mages suspect your magic is unusual. They know you helped to close the veil, and it's a matter of time before someone asks you how you did it. I thought I'd let you come up with your own cover story. I opened my mouth and closed it. Damn. I might have eased up on the don't tell anyone about Faerie and Avakis issue, but the idea of word spreading like wildfire across the district's mages didn't appeal. After all, word might reach Calder. He might find out I was alive. If you continue to work with me, somebody is bound to ask you eventually, Vance said. I wanted to warn you in advance. A few people asked questions at the summit. Damn, I muttered. All right. We're going with what I first told you. I have fairy ancestors somewhere. Might be true, for all I know. I've never seen my family tree. He gave a short nod, his expression pensive. Feeling sorry for me? The aching gap my parents' deaths had left was one problem amongst 1,000 I'd had to deal with when I'd walked back from Faerie into a world changed beyond recognition. I thought about them sometimes, of course, but they were a part of the old world, my old life, before Faerie. Anyway, I said, suddenly aware of the short distance between us and the tingling sensation his hands left where they'd touched the skin of my healed wrist. I'll train with Wanda, if she's okay with it. Wanda herself had once told me Vance had a protective streak and wanted to look out for all of his mages. Guilt over what I'd withheld from him writhed inside me. I dug in my pocket for my phone. I'll let Isabel know I'm okay. I can drop you off on your doorstep, he said. Just in case. His eyes looked darker in the dim light, and a magnetic pull urged me to move closer to him. You're deceiving him. He's your boss. 100 excuses rocketed around my head, fading to a dull buzz with every step. A whisper of coldness brushed against the back of my neck, like a caress. When he took my arm and pulled me closer, the tension thickened until I could hardly breathe. I tried to say, I thought you said our relationship was a professional one, but the words disappeared on the way to my mouth. Vance leaned in, lips hovering above mine. Giving in, I arched into him, daring him to cover the last inch between us. His tongue teased me, tracing my mouth, and then slipped inside. I responded in kind, nipping at his lower lip. A growl built low in his throat, and the breeze stirring in the air lifted the hair from my head. His cool, appealing scent slid over my bones, sending a frisson of heat through my body.
a rustle of wind later, and we stood on my doorstep. For a moment I waited, pressed against his warm, solid body. Safe, for now. God, I didn't want to move.
You should get inside, he murmured, his cheek brushing against mine.
Yeah, I should. Erwin the Pisky flew past, shrieking, and I jumped out of my trance. Flushed and breathless, I threw a goodbye over my shoulder and fled into the building. Panting, I shoved my key into the lock, but my hands were shaking too much to aim. The door opened, and Isabel jumped, concern flitting across her face. How'd it go? Great. In response to her raised eyebrow, I added, as good as it could possibly go, considering. I'm fine. Several half-fairies aren't. Her gaze moved to my bloody knees. Injuries? Vance took care of them. I followed her into the flat. Took care of you? She spun to face me. I knew you looked weird. You're blushing. I'm not, I said. Am I? You look like someone just... No way. He kissed you, didn't he? My mouth parted. Can we deal with this in the morning? I'm really tired. Nice try. She grinned at me. I figured it was only a matter of time. Do I need to run through the reasons why this is a bad idea? I checked Irene was where I'd left her, out of habit. I'm fighting for my life,